I analogize skyscrapers to building an extraordinary life. You have to have a very strong foundation. And that structure that you're going to build, I call it the superstructure. And then you need a tough skin, and we're racing up the building to put the skin on, and everything is a cycle. You're stacking houses on top of each other.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 272. My guest today is one of Manhattan's most successful skyscraper experts and has managed the syndication and development of high-profile real estate investments totaling more than $1.3 billion in capital investments, including 1,500 luxury high-rise residential units and 3 million square foot of commercial, office, and residential. He's also completed over 3,000 transactions. Ken Van Liew is also an author, educator, engineer, and real estate coach whose book, Modern Wealth Building Formula: How to Master Real Estate Investing, has empowered thousands of real estate investors over the past 20 years. And today, we're going to talk about what it takes to build skyscrapers and learn exactly what the Modern Wealth Building Formula actually means. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. You're obviously a heavy hitter, and I'd love it if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started investing in real estate in the first place.
That's an interesting path that I love to tell people because it was different, and the difference was most people go through an ascension path into real estate, starting off something a little smaller and building their way up. And I guess I had the philosophy, go big or go home. But, how it all started, I struggled in college. I created the 6-year plan. But the one thing I had was some gridiron experience from football. So after 6 years of, muddling through, I received a civil engineering degree. And through that experience, I had some construction experience during summers. I had done this huge dam rehabilitation. And when I graduated, I won this design development award, where I took a 13-acre site, subdivided it, and it was my first time learning about development. But I was kind of young. I wasn't connecting the dots. Had to go out and become an engineer. Lasted about 8 months, designed a couple sites. This wasn't for me. I had liked construction. And I had a chance to build a skyscraper working for the LEFRAC organization. And I was 26 years old, and I gave it a shot, and I was a superintendent. I built the skyscraper. I went on, I stayed in construction and built myself up and never really looked back in engineering, even after I was not a quick learner. I took my PE test 5 times before I passed. But by that time, I couldn't really go back to engineering because I was making a lot of money in construction, was building high rises. And I said, this is kind of the way to go. And that career went on and built for all the largest developers, was fortunate to build a $1 billion project for Bruce Ratner, former owner of the Nets, Metro Tech in Brooklyn, and then, 1,500 residential units over time. And, all of a sudden, I started to say, how could I get into real estate? I started to say, do you have to be born into the family? And I used to stand on top of the buildings and look back over, New Jersey and going, I have to be able to do something over there, And it was funny, and if I'm hijacking the call, just let me know here. I don't want
to keep going. This is fascinating.
Yeah. And, and it all started, we're here, my wife and I, we had twins after struggling with children, and I was 31. And I was like, what am I going to do? This isn't going to work for me. I need to hit it big, go big or go home. And I had a dream. I started thinking back, on how, I could make this happen. And coincidentally, my mother-in-law says, hey, Kenneth, you want to go play an outing at a country club? They're looking for members. And I couldn't even, afford a country club. I figured, let me go get a free lunch and won't feel guilty about it, play some golf. And as I'm, playing golf, I'm like, wow, it'd be pretty nice to belong to a country club one day, and I went home. They had an executive drive. I tell my wife, can you lend me $5,000? At that time, because, she managed the money. And I joined this executive level, kind of speed the story up. I'm telling my story on the golf course. This guy goes, hey, Ken, I'll give you $100,000. Tell my wife I have this taxation filtration system. I'm going to leave my $175,000 executive job building high rises in New York for other people and go develop. And I'm going to pay myself $5,000 a month. She's like, are you crazy? What are we going to do? We just had the twins. And what I did, I had such confidence at that point. My story was, I'm going to go buy property, no money down, or like refundable deposit, and I'm going to develop. And sure enough, within 3 months of getting that $100,000, I took $25,000. I locked up a 12-acre site. I prefabricated a 72,113 bed assisted living facility. The dentist said I have a certificate of need. I started writing my first letter of intent on a napkin. I didn't even really know much about contracts. And I went through this development process, kind of using other people's experience, and I said, okay, I went down to City Hall. They're like, sir, you can't solicit here. I said, well, who's the former town council? I call him. Hey, how do you get through approvals over here? He's like, well, you got to hire this guy. Go to this engineer and, I can represent you, and, go to this planner and talk to this traffic guy. And the next thing you know, I'm raising money. I do my first tranche for $400,000. I get the drawings done. I get us to the planning board. I start paying myself $30,000 a month. Sign myself a development fee myself. Really don't know what I'm doing, but I had 9 ways to figure out how I could pay myself. And I signed this agreement with myself, do my first tranche. I'm like, wow, I got this all locked up. Everybody's in position. We go in, we get planning board approval. I then tranche another 400, do all the construction drawings. And I worked with the New Jersey EDA because they only needed 10% down. It was a $17 million project. They said, raise another 600, we'll close the loan. That was it. Closed the loan, built it in 13 months, never looked back. Paid myself over $1 million. Back then, couldn't get as much ownership as I wanted, but grabbed 10%. And I just rinsed and repeated that. So, in summary, and I'll let you ask another question, is that, I ascended upon the ascension path that I mentioned, using the stuff I learned in Manhattan with skyscrapers to find out when you take those methods and use it in residential, you accelerate, or you can descend on the ascension path with a top-down thinking and do anything in real estate. And that's how I got started, and it led into the modern wealth building formula. And here I am today, just as a normal guy that puts his pants on one leg at a time.
All right, there's so much there, and it's hard to wrap my head around it because most of my conversations on this show are with real estate investors and rental property owners who start with, say, a duplex or single family and work their way up to a 200-unit apartment complex, or have a portfolio of 20 units. Your mentality and approach came from building skyscrapers and then developing this $17 million project. It seems like you never went the starter route that most people went. You just like jumped right into the fire. And there's some real interesting differences between your mentality and the typical mentality I see of real estate investors. And yours is more, it seems like a project-based mentality. The bigger the project, the more exciting you're going to be about it. Can you talk about that a little bit? And is that part of your wealth building formula, your modern wealth building formula?
Yeah, it's funny how you dissected that from everything I said, because when I sat there, many nights when the twins were on the way, like, how are you going to pay these twins? I was already saying, like, 20 years down the road, how am I going to afford the education? I really looked at, if I just, I said to myself, I could pay through a development process 9 different ways, because in building them for other people, I was like, that guy makes this and I know his skill, and that guy does that and I know his skill, and that guy does that. I'm like, wow, what if I can put this together and pay myself and just do one project that would set me free, because really I looked at how everybody else, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with it. Because when I went in reverse, I eventually, as I had started a concrete company, I'll tell you, built towers myself, cracked the code on non-union. I then had a calling to see if it worked in the residential so that I could say that the modern wealth building formula across the board. So when we got into the wholesaling, if you have some question on that, I proved it out on the dissension path. But as I was saying, my thinking back then was, I need to hit it big. I need to sign something. I kept thinking I can pay myself 5% development fee. If I can get a $10 million project, that's $500,000. And I know how to do that. I can run the construction. I'll figure out the development part. So all along, like you said, I kept thinking, get that bigger project. Just do that one project. And since then, now that I'm looking at it, it's been very project based. Then we did, $100 million development in New York at 240 Park Avenue. Tom Brady comes to see the penthouse, and then it was kind of history from there. But very, very good question. That's how I used to think,
Yeah, it seems like it was a project. And then what's the size of that project? What is your 5% equal to, so that you can just keep laddering upward and onward there?
Yeah, and now that you just said that, back then, because I didn't have the equity, I was thinking more along the lines of size of projects, because that created the highest fee. Now my approach is different because I have the control to take a much larger slice of a deal, and I'm not necessarily worried about the fee. The fee is, that pays, the group, and that's, how it works now. It's just a difference in mentality.
Now it's more like, what's the size of your pie? What's your slice of pie, as opposed to what's your fee? I'm real interested in just the idea of building high rises in the first place.
Sure.
And you're building them in Manhattan and probably New Jersey as well.
I built one back in the day in New Jersey, but all of the ones I did were in Brooklyn and New York City.
Give us the basic 101 education on what it takes to actually build a high rise.
I'm going to tell you one thing to kind of give you the perspective that if you've built a house, it's the same process. You're just doing it. You're stacking it. I call it the stacking method. So I'm giving you that as a preliminary example. But how do you build a high rise, right? So the first thing, the process is the same. You have to assemble land, and it's a much more vertical thinking, right? So there's a thing called floor to air ratio, but and what that means is, based on the area of the site and the FAR, that determines kind of how high you can go. And in New York City, not like any other place in the world, the zoning is like black or white. You go to this area, it has a certain FAR. This is the size site. You could build this building. And unless you're going to like restore the subway next door, put some type of concession, they'll give you a little bit more FAR so you could pop a penthouse or two at the top and get some more gravy. But it's really, really straightforward. So it's not like this lengthy going through the process, like in the 24-acre development I'm doing now. I go through this sometimes 12-month, 18-month process before you get the gravy. New York City, you hit it hard. If the numbers work, you immediately go into, like, if you're assembling land, sometimes takes a little while, but you immediately go into conceptual and design development. And during that process, you're in what we call pre-construction. And if you were, doing a residential home, where, you could buy out, you can go, okay, build that home for me for $200 a square foot. Here's the contract, get started tomorrow. And if you have a relationship, you shake your hand. In skyscrapers, the foundation process, like one of my foundations was like 30 feet down, alongside of buildings. And you spend a lot of time figuring out how you're going to protect the surrounding area, how you're going to underpin buildings. There's a large soil investigation. Speed it up a little bit, you break ground, you start digging that foundation. You usually see a green fence around that site for about 6 months, because it takes a while to build that foundation, excavate. There's a whole science behind geotechnical engineering. And then, being in the concrete business, once you hit grade, every 4 days, you'll see a floor. Those buildings go up. If you're doing reinforced concrete, if you're doing steel, it takes a little longer. But once that process goes up, it's all construction. So as a developer, you put the burden off on that contractor. In New York, you make them, sign with performance bonds, and you buy schedules, and you buy, guaranteed maximum prices. And during that pre-construction period I was mentioning to you, like there's some contracts that we would buy out, like concrete contracts that would come to me were $7 or $8 million sometimes. Before I had a concrete company, giving the concrete to myself, to put a scope of work to make sure that you buy concrete going on a 4-day cycle for a certain price and a certain time schedule takes a little art. And that's, where, people that want to work for guys like me, I help people build skyscrapers also, or other types of properties. But that's a little bit about the process. But when you're building that building, it's like anything else, it's, and I analogize skyscrapers to building an extraordinary life. You have to have a very strong foundation, and that structure that you're going to build, I call it the superstructure. I like them out of concrete, because it's solid, it's rigid, and then you need a tough skin, and we're racing up the building to put the skin on, and everything is a cycle. So as you hear, you have concrete going up in 4 days. Then as you get to a suit and floor, you have the skin starting to go up. Internally, you have the elevator working in the shafts. You have your layout starting, then your studs are standing, then your electric and plumbing, and you start the cycle. As I mentioned before, you're stacking houses on top of each other. And yes, there's there's the gangsters sometimes that come to help you out, get it done a little quicker. But we all work together, and I didn't mean that facetiously or anything, but maybe cut that out. But we're just joking.
You want me to cut that part out?
No, I'm good. I'm teasing. No. We in some of the projects I did in Brooklyn, you watch the movies, and all those guys would come to the site, and Atlas Gem was erecting steel, and Sammy the Bull Gravano would come to the site, and all that kind of crazy stuff. But if you didn't take care of those guys, the gate would lock and they'd lose the key, or the hoist would break down and things would stop going up and down. And, when I went into the concrete business, I didn't know that it was going to work. But, like I said, the world changed, and everybody works together. And that's what we have to do in today's world, just work together.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. You brought up three things that I find really fascinating, and I'll kind of take them in reverse order. So the people who show up and demand payments for making sure the doors stay open and you can get the work done. Any interesting stories there? Any run-ins or complications?
Absolutely. There was a meeting I had one time with the guy who owned Atlas Gem, and we sat down to sign a contract, and he pulled a pistol out and put it on the table, and it was pretty uncomfortable. But that was interesting. Fortunately, the project worked out well. I don't know what was intended there, but I didn't really buy a ticket to the show. Maybe it was poking him in the side or something. But really the funniest thing was, when I was building Union, on how, the five families would control different aspects of the project. One would be concrete, one would be masonry, one would be the Teamsters. But, just as long as that ecosystem evolved, and the numbers were running along with the hoist and all of that kind of good stuff. Everybody played harmonious, and then there got a certain point where you probably heard of the story where you'd come to the site and you have this big rat, standing out in front of your site, blown up with picketers. And back then we had to work, with the FBI and the unions and putting junctions on them. And we started what was a two-gate system. So we would allow all the picketers and the big rat to send here, and we would just open this other gate and keep working. So, there's always an end around and any barricade that hits you,
Wow, you really have to know how to play all the different angles and players in that sort of scenario. I mean, there's just so many different factors that you have to take into account.
Yeah, and then there's the coalition. So, we used to have
coalition. What's the coalition?
The coalition, in the sense of I guess you would say the underprivileged sometimes would line up in front of our building with all wearing red bandanas, and it was dangerous. They would kind of have their own picket line. But what we'd have to do is make a deal and hire locals and work with the coalition and learn what their needs are, and like you said, there was a lot of moving parts and a lot of variables and behind the scenes stuff. And I guess that was probably one of the more challenging stuff, because one of the first companies I worked for was a company called Liew. They were restoring the Statue of Liberty. And they taught me a lot about, how to have integrity in the business and keep your nose clean. And I saw a little bit of it, but when I moved into other skyscrapers and working for other people, owners, is when I got introduced to some of the more interesting stories. So it's been fun, So working with the coalitions, working with the city, working with the gangsters at times, is that just a cost of doing business? And do you usually tack on an extra 10, 15% to the cost of construction to work through those things? Yeah, back in that day, there was definitely a factor, and I'm not saying anything that's not public information, but there was a time they did a sweep of city officials and they pulled like 40 of them in because they were taking money, But back in the day, there was a lot of grease in the wheel, as you can say, and I don't necessarily see it as much. I think maybe people are starting to learn their lesson, or maybe it's presented in a different fashion, but it's changed a little bit, and there's not as much as a stronghold, at least in my environment, where it was, because I used to leave my environment and go, wait a minute, you don't have like somebody coming to talk to you once a week, making sure that these guys are working over here? You're like, nah. I'm like, okay, a little different, but you just go with it. It was one of those things. You'd see the appliances coming up to the apartments, and then they'd be going out the back door into some truck sometimes. But sometimes you just have to look the other way,
That's we don't encounter that so much here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But
there was a company in Grand Rapids that used to come and do my mansard roofs. And, I was friendly with them back in the day. Over 25 years, we took a trip to Alaska and had some fun. But yeah, you have to have fun when you're working with that intensity,
Absolutely. Yeah. And intensity is a good word. You mentioned buying your own concrete company. Yeah. Was that a matter of necessity or to save money? What led to that?
Yeah, great question. So what we did is we formed a concrete company. And, so when you think concrete, sometimes think of a concrete plant where you're mixing concrete. So that's one portion of concrete. We had a reinforced concrete company that built the superstructure. So I probably had over 150 men on payroll. And, what we did was we thought at first, because I had a large construction management company where we would serve other clients. And at first I thought bringing concrete in, having more control of it, because concrete, once upon a time, you'd spend $100 a square foot to pour concrete in New York City. When I started my concrete company, I figured out how to pour concrete between $53 and $57 a square foot. So I knew I could be very, very competitive, and I felt that I could bring better pricing to ownership. Make a long story short, as I started to do it, it became a lot of focus, which was taking me away from my construction management, let alone the development that I wanted to do. So I was kind of going backwards, more into a trade specific. And when I realized that there's a perspective, there's a perspective that owners have and people have of from back in the day of bid rigging, and not that we were ever accused, but there was always that subconscious thing. Well, why are you always cheaper? Like, because we're being honest and we're telling you what the real price is. Like, if you don't want to do business with it, that's fine. And it all of a sudden it became like a sale, and I'm not trying to sell anybody, I just figured out how to make life have less friction, right? You can drive along with friction, or you can slide like on ice. And having less friction in what we do is the key to success.
I want to talk about the foundation of these skyscrapers and high rises, because you did touch on that. You said sometimes you're going down 30 stories, and you mentioned that unless you're going to repair the subway next door, I mean, there's a lot of things underground in New York and
Yes.
Manhattan.
So the whole key with Manhattan when building skyscrapers is you have to get to rock to support it, and to get to rock, sometimes you have, and if you were in the outskirts, you'd have blasting conditions. Of course, you can't blast rock next to high rises. So you're here building like something that I would say is heavy construction in like a gentle environment, right? So when you're building alongside, some of my toughest projects were along subway stations, where you had to set up vibration monitoring devices throughout the entire subway and monitor it on a daily basis. When you're building skyscrapers, doing foundations, all the buildings alongside of me were presented with optical telltales, we called them. I would have automated surveying machines on the other side of the street that constantly surveyed the buildings. One foundation that I was doing, we had a building that started to lean. It was a Secant Foundation. We knew that the buildings were going to be challenging. And in a lot of buildings, we would plan to what's called underpin the building. So you actually underpin before you excavate, support that building structurally before you do any excavation. In this project, I had the buildings were fragile, they were low, they were hard to underpin. We didn't know much about soil conditions, so we did a Secant Foundation. And what that is drilling circular 36-inch diameter cylinders down to rock and then pouring pillars. And you drill these in sequence, where you do A's, B's, C's, D's, where then you have all these circles interlocked. So you create a bathtub, and then you dig out the soil. But during that process, I had a leaning building that almost came over 8 inches. We were going to have to evacuate it. I had to emergency rigging, shoot secants to rock, put up rakers to hold the building up. So I've had some interesting foundations in New York City. I've had other ones that have been along as a football field when I did Brooklyn Union Gas headquarters, and just looking at that whole build and the walls and the construction, and then how the elevator comes out of that. It's just absolutely spectacular to see it happen.
And you're an engineer as well, right?
I am a professional engineer. Yes.
Okay, so that gives you good insight as a developer. Is that a developer's worst nightmare when your building starts to lean?
I would have to say that was one of my worst nightmares. I did not sleep at night. We were literally, because we immediately studied it and we saw it happening and it was moving really slow. We had realized that it had already moved 3 inches in that soil conditions. We immediately ejected grout under this building. It still was moving. We then put rakers to hold the building. We then came up with a detail off of the secant to lodge into the foundation to finally solve it. But not having because I put my engineering hat on the side a long time ago. You don't need to be an engineer. To syndicate real estate, you could be a banker, you could be a lawyer. Fortunately, I had geotechnical engineering experience during this circumstance, but I relied a lot on my engineers because, I was not sleeping at night. I was in charge of that, $100 million development. And, more importantly, people could have lost their homes or someone could get hurt,
It sounds like you solved that issue with the, I think you called it a Secant Foundation.
Yeah, the Secant Foundation, which was the steps to kind of prevent it. And when it didn't naturally, essentially prevent it, we were able to rectify it with rakers. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, that building was actually leaning on our building with a Teflon plate that we created. We made some like movement connection, and we did solve the problem. Yeah, it went back to the people who were more pissed off that we blocked their windows instead of it falling down. Yeah.
Which is a better problem to have.
Right.
So I'd imagine that was very expensive, and it makes me wonder, are there any problems that you've encountered as a high-rise developer that money could not solve?
Well, that fortunately could have been one that could not have been solved if we would have been, liable for any means and methods that may have caused that. But because we had taken such precautionary measures to do the Secant Foundation, and when we actually did borings under their building, we found that the soil underneath their building, and because it had leaned already 3 inches, was unsuitable. And that probably would have occurred over time anyway. And only because of those facts, we were able to file an insurance claim, and because it was probably close to $1.8 million to resolve that problem, and we literally got back, I think, close to the full amount in insurance. So we were fortunate, but something like that could cause a problem. And I guess if you're development wise, there's always environmentals, probably your biggest risk if for some reason your initial investigation misses it. And your biggest, I guess, challenge with skyscrapers, and one of the reasons why, I've always taken a construction management approach instead of putting all your eggs in one basket with a general contractor, is that, you're probably your biggest risk is with construction. So, if one of the trades goes belly up and then all of a sudden it screws up the sequence, or the electrician falls out, is probably your biggest risk after that, where, you'd have to, worst case scenario, call in a bonding company and throw a lot of money at it to kind of fix it. And you really wouldn't have too much recourse after that.
And it sounds like what you're saying is if your electrical or plumbing or whatever falls out or goes belly up, that throws off the entire schedule, and that's why it costs a lot of money?
Yeah, because like in a skyscraper, like the sequence of each trade working in sequence, like that electrician, I'll give him 5 days to rough a floor. So his team has to keep moving in the building. If they were to run into financial difficulty, or on 29th Street, I'll give you a perfect example. Here I have a facade which has stucco metal panels and a honeycomb panel that I'm getting from, I can't even remember. It may have been in Canada, right? Something to that effect. So here, these prefabricators where we get an installer from New York to install those panels, they like a big down payment. Then they want a big deposit before they go into production. And sure enough, when it came delivery time, we found out they filed Chapter 11, right? So, fortunately, that was just an exterior where, we could put, plastic up and a panel and keep the heat from coming in, or keep the scaffold up a little bit. It costs a little extra. It didn't screw up the entire sequence. Did we get knocked off our perch? Yes. There was another project. God rest his soul. The owner of a window company lost his balance and went off of the edge, down 40 floors. We just figured 3-4 months later, this company's going under. There was a building where I had a hoist. So when we took the hoist down, that company always comes back and we call fill the hoist run. Well, that company was no longer in business. That material was hard to get, and we had to find another company to close the hoist run. Meanwhile, I couldn't finish that whole apartment line, but, you had to throw a little extra money at it. But things like that happen, then how do you ask that question? Great question.
Yeah, it seems like you really have to have a strong philosophy of being able to encounter a lot of situations like that, and also know where to go and what to do to get the answer, because it seems there must be so many fires that you have to put out all the time.
It is. It's a constant fire drill, and the fire department over there is the toughest one. They'll rigged firemen, like 10 of them will come walking in your building. Okay, we just want to check it out, make sure everybody can get out of here in case there's an emergency. Because, you got sometimes a couple hundred people, you got temporary sprinkler systems, kind of everything's temporary. So they call you on it all the time. Fire drills, traffic, logistics, like, you don't have the luxury of, yeah, pull that tractor trailer in and leave that over there. If we didn't erect the 9 panels that were supposed to go up, we had another truck that was coming through the tunnel at 3 a.m. in the morning that if we didn't finish, he was going to be parking on the west side and he couldn't come into position until later in the day. So it's like totally sequenced, like every hoist, we had, like, people would schedule. I'd like the hoist from, 1:30 to 3:30. We're coming in with a truck of sheet metal. And it was very, very logistically coordinated at all times.
Is the construction of high rises and skyscrapers very similar today to the way it was, 20, 30 years ago, or is technology making it better or harder, as the case may be?
Technology's helping. There's the BIM, the building information management systems that are being used, where I've coordinated mechanical layers and done everything digital, where you see the structure and you can coordinate everything, and found that was expeditious, and the technology advanced it. Back in 2000, I wrote a paper, Plan Room 2000. So, the paper, it's not nearly as voluminous. Of course, supers need their large sets of drawings and their shop drawings, and we need hard copies, but most of the PMs work electronically, and digitally you have unbelievable tracking systems. Where things have changed in the field is everything has become very safety oriented. So it has slowed stuff down. There was a time when I did my first high rise in New Jersey, actually on the waterfront. We were doing 2-day cycles. I mean, the concrete was still wet. that's how bad it was, because it takes 7 days for concrete to get its full strength. And literally we would be framing like the following day on top of green concrete, which you never see anymore. So we're on 4-day cycles now. And, back in the day, I have what's called as a site safety license. So anybody building a 100,000 square foot building is licensed. They're on the hook. I'm also a site safety manager. So you have 2 licenses. You have a site safety manager. So everybody is all about safety, and it goes a little slower.
I also want to talk about your modern wealth building formula. And you wrote a book about that. And I'm just curious, what is it? Does it have to do with development, building a real estate portfolio? Could you describe it to us?
Yeah. As I look at it now, it's how I mastered real estate investing. And it's a combination of a little bit of Tony Robbins, a little bit of New York City real estate development, a little bit of the formula that I put together. And I, you could use the word syndication, or I call it formation agreement, but I've been able to truly, form agreements in real estate development. And I guess if I were to coin it, it shows my system, which is how to find, fund, and facilitate real estate development, that as I now have completed the book and, look at how everybody's doing things, it applies, because you're, whether it's any business, you're finding it, you're figuring out how to fund it, and then you have to facilitate it. And, I have this 3F system that ties into a certain mindset. It tells you, a little bit about everything in real estate and how the content applies across the board. So that's where I felt back in the day when I had created Real Estate Development Made Simple. Someone said to me, Ken, that program's in the stratosphere. It's not going to apply to anybody. Break it down. And that's why I said I need to hit the spectrum and create something like the modern wealth building formula, that someone who's doing wholesaling, that thinks they don't really need money. And you'll hear people argue with me, but the bottom line is, when you start wholesaling, you're going to get bored. Then you're going to want to fix and flip. You're eventually, like everybody else, you're ultimately in the money business, in some fashion or not. So you might as well learn how to just, join hands with people, and create, like my friend and I were joking this week. I was with Dolph DeRoos this week, and he was hanging out at my house, and he said to me, Ken, would we rather have the grape or a nice slice of the watermelon? It's like, Dolph, I'll take the slice. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Find, fund, and facilitate. Those are the 3 Fs.
Yes.
The facilitate part is the part that intrigues me, because it seems like, you definitely have high energy a real personality. And I can't imagine you not being afraid to pick up the phone and call someone to help you solve a problem that you might have. Talk about that a little bit. Like, what is your mentality when it comes to getting things done? Is it just pick up the phone and find the right person to solve the problem with you?
Yeah. And I don't want you to think that I'm anybody, different. So, there's always times where I think I'm not enough, and the phone has absolutely weighed, 500 pounds before. And a lot, has come down, I believe, and I hate to always say this, but, I used to think everything I thought about was true. And then I would create these stories where in 2008, when we lost like $330 million in one day, I blamed the Wall Street crash on me, and, it's easy to create that story because, we lost that day. Fortunately, we rebuilt, but, it's been a lot about mindset, and believing in yourself and knowing that there's people out there to help you, and one of the things that, when I started the development, I was telling you, and I coined it, was creating a dream team around you, people that are better than yourself. And it took me a while to get rid of the flashy suits and the ego, and get humble as I am today. Sometimes, I get accused of being a little tough, but, I like holding people accountable and, keeping their word. But I guess the biggest thing was the mindset, because, I came from $10 a week buying a 6-pack and washing my clothes and not really knowing what to do. And, and then, having twins and figuring out, how am I going to buy formula to, just, saying like, okay, I did this on the football field and I did that on the construction site. Used to ask the plumber, like, what are you doing there? He would explain, well, this is a croton and you put this in because of dissimilar metals. And I just started to utilize other people's experience, so, if someone's out there and feeling like you're not enough, or, as Tony Robbins says, it's fear of failure, fear of rejection, pick up the phone and get in touch with me. I'll straighten yourself. I'll straighten you out, because I've been there, and, it doesn't happen anymore, but, it's really about, something would occur. You create a story around it. It's not really what happened. You get stuck in that rut. Sometimes you go into a rabbit hole, it gets worse, and, that's when you want to reach out to mentors, and just, have, faith it till you make it,
You mentioned the crash in 2008, and I think you said $320 million, or your value went down by that amount. Talk about navigating some of those really difficult times, whether it's the Great Recession or even the pandemic we're going through now. What are some of your experiences, and how are you dealing with them?
So back then, I didn't deal with that very well. I was in a state of depression, and I left real estate for a while. I was like, okay, what building am I going to jump off of? Just kidding. But, I thought real estate was over. I created a whole story, and, I tried something new, and I've been a magician since I was a kid, but magic brought me back into real estate, and I tried to buy Stewart's root beer and go down another path. And I realized about mastery, and to be a master, you have to have 10,000 hours. And I sat and I said, wow, how many hours do I have? And it was about 108,000 hours, and I didn't want to give up there, and in that time I really grew, because it took about 3 years before I got back into the game. And then it was go big or go home again. And I jumped into the construction management and the contracting, because I knew that, knowing that it would lead me back into the development, and I wasn't going to give up. Right. So, it's never give up, and, to bring it to today, when the pandemic started, and, on one of my projects, a guy who I saw every week, died. And then my client had it. And then I looked up Madison Avenue both ways, and there was no buses or no cars. It became very surreal. And I said, thank you. I'm here to be the leader, and there was a couple of days I cried, but I had been through it, so I don't want to give the cliche, but what doesn't kill you is going to make you stronger. And, I looked at the whole pandemic as that this will be an opportunity, And there are areas around Manhattan that are booming in real estate. And yes, there are buildings that are crashing in New York in value that, 200 million to 20 million, but it will come back. I truly believe that it will come back.
What do you mean it's up to you to be the leader when you looked around Madison Avenue and said, thank you? What does that mean to be the leader?
Yeah, because, there's leaders and then there's leaders. And, when I look, so for someone that's been in Manhattan his whole life and to see Madison Avenue, like just empty, like during when Governor Cuomo shut down. And the reason I was there because I was able to I had a penthouse wide open. I had to get an essential services permit, keep people working where people didn't even want to come to the job. They were afraid. The site safety was making us take temperatures, gloves, wipe down the site. It was the most horrific thing I had ever experienced in construction. And it was a very surreal moment for me when I looked up and down that road. And my first thing was, you know what, I need to be the leader's leader at this time because I have leaders under me and everybody was questioning themselves. And I was like, okay, I could question myself right now, or I could just be a leader's leader, or what, this is much bigger than myself, because at that moment it was a tough challenge. And that's where I said, I remember Tony Robbins saying to me when the towers collapsed, I was with him and I lost my first $500,000. Your feelings will be based on what you focus on. And I said, I'm not going to focus on this. My daughter's getting married. We're going to still have 31 people in my backyard. And she's going to marry a doctor. And I'm going to be excited. And he's going to Columbia. And this is what I'm going to focus on. And real estate's going to come back and hit it hard. That's it.
I mean, I'd imagine you're in a position of leadership where when the pandemic happened, it was hard to know what best practices were when it comes to keeping a job site open. So is that part of what you had to do too, is just say, here's what we're going to do. And we'll work with whatever the government says, but here's what I need to do to keep my people safe.
It was exactly that. We did not know what to do. We were literally on the hour waiting for the governor to give certain orders, which then had to trickle down to the New York City building department. I had my expediters and safety teams on it that were like setting up services immediately, where I had people there to run temperatures on the people, fill out the forms that you probably experienced. And we literally set up a machine. I quarantined certain areas in the building with plastics, directed everybody to the penthouse. But doing that, adding just building a penthouse alone is stressful. Adding that all just, it was like, wow, things are going to change. But, I just kept, fighting through, thinking, hey, my son's a Marine. He's serving the country. I can serve society right now,
So when you look back at where you started, and I think you said, you were making $10 an hour, you're from New Jersey, you've certainly accomplished a lot between then and now. What would you say to yourself back then to prepare yourself for where you are now?
Wow. That's great because what's happening in my life now, I'm asking that question. Dolph and I and Chris Crone are, talking about, going worldwide, and, it's I've been blessed. Back then, what I would say is, you can accomplish anything that you put your mind to, and you have your mind on some really big things. So you better get ready, because, I guess subconsciously I didn't believe 100% until, it got to a certain point. But, if someone's sitting there and they have doubt in what's on their mind, or whether or not they can achieve what's on their mind and achieve what, anything that's on their mind, you can accomplish it. I did it in sports. I did it in construction, engineering. And I wasn't smart at all. I just worked a lot more hours, and then it eventually got a little easier. But
you talk about going worldwide with Dolph DeRoos, and I'm not sure the other gentleman. But what does that mean? Are you sharing your wealth building formula? I know you do coaching and that. What exactly are you thinking of as far as taking this worldwide? So
Dolph is has a worldwide presence. And, and just like when we started the conversation, I said to Dolph, how could we serve your audiences And, we just talked this weekend about whether it's the modern wealth building formula or anything, we just want to go worldwide and help people. So, of course, along that line, the modern wealth building formula will be part of it, and I think the modern wealth building formula applies to any business, so, I would deprive people if we didn't. But, me personally, I'm going to focus on real estate development. When I say go worldwide, we're going to try to leverage, what we can teach people and help people and see how, it's not really about the money for us. People need leaders giving them options in life right now. And that's what Dolph and I do,
Yeah. So Ken, if our listeners wanted to find out more about that and more about you, or even get in touch with you or your organization, how would they go about doing that?
You can either get me direct through kenvanliew.com. There's a Discover Now button that'll lead you to a scheduling link if you'd like to speak direct with me. And my company is Global Real Estate Strategies. Dolph, you could see Dolph on the website there and what we do, who we are and what we're all about. And, anything that we can do to help you out, whether it's with Global or me personally, or you moving your thing forward, we're honestly here to help people move it forward, because we truly believe if we help you achieve what you want, we'll achieve what we want. And that's just to build a brand and, allow people to know that we're all blind and just starting to see.
And as we wrap it up, any final thoughts or parting advice you'd like to share with our listeners?
Take that first step. If you're sitting there and hesitating because you can't see around the corner, you just got to get to that first corner and stick your head around and you'll see, the vision that you do believe that you see now. It's there. So, take that first step. Sometimes it takes 3 to get to the 7th. So, don't be afraid. Just get started. Crack the ice. Don't be afraid. Failure doesn't exist. And don't worry about rejection.
Ken, I really enjoyed talking with you about building skyscrapers, high-rise development, even owning a concrete business and dealing with gangsters. It's been a lot of fun talking with you, and I'm really glad we had this conversation. Thank you.
Likewise. And I commend you on your success. And if there's anything, let's keep in touch and be friends, my friend.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.